Hello, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Borders. And this is the podcast where we specifically focus on all things global expansion. And we do that by speaking to a whole range of guests, and sometimes they're business leaders and founders and C-suite executives that are taking on that challenge themselves. And sometimes they're service providers who help us on our journey as we're going about these exciting plans. And other times they're just really cool people with really cool experiences that we might learn things from. And in many cases, and in particular this one, it's all of the above that we'll hopefully get some useful information from. And today on this conversation, I'm joined by Bill Kenney from Meet. And Bill, welcome to Beyond Borders.
Thank you. My goal here is to immediately bring the expectations down, though.
Well, we like to start off really easy, so hopefully that helps. It'd just be great if you just give everyone a bit of a background of yourself and experiences, and then an overview of Meet as well, and that'll set the scene for some of the conversations.
Sure. Yeah. No, we've really specialized for the last 14 years in terms of helping international companies expand to the U.S. through trade shows, events, in-person marketing, a lot of strategic connections. And so we're kind of all about sort of supporting companies, both as they're aiming to get traction and then as they look to scale in the US, kind of those two inflection points. And my background is really for many years has been all in sort of sales and marketing, particularly to enterprise type companies. So more strategic type sales, ones where there are a variety of buying influences, more complex, that type of thing. And so that's those are the types of clients that we work with and where we can really make an impact.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like a plethora of experience we can dig into today there. So I guess the hypothesis that sort of guides this discussion today, and I sort of know this to be true because when our phone rings at Brian's, it's usually somebody that says, "Hey, I'd like to expand my business, but I don't know how to start." Or more commonly, it's somebody that says, "I didn't think this would be that hard, and I've now got into a bit of a mess. Can you help?" And so the hypothesis today is that too many businesses set out on this exciting journey of global expansion without a really clear definition of milestones they're going to achieve and the ROI that they need to get from this expansion. And I think you and I can just sort of kick that around a little bit, and it'd be great to hear from you what you see in the market and ultimately how you could help people not fall into that trap.
Yeah, well, and you know this, but for the listeners, I'm on a sailboat, so most of my references will be maritime. So I think, when most people when they're expanding internationally, it more often than not means crossing an ocean. As somebody on a sailboat, my most valuable tool is a chart, and a chart doesn't just show me the blue water and the sunny skies. It shows me the dangers. It shows me where I can go awry. And I think, that's kind of, I think the context of really kind of what you need to begin assessing as you're looking to expand internationally is sort of where are your strengths, what assets and resources do you have, and capacities, but also where are the gaps, where might things go awry, and how do you best prepare for that? Because I think the it it will be different than you
Yeah.
expect,
Yeah.
and it's sort of what do you do when it is? I think in the end, and the wisdom, at least from what we've learned, and I think our focus is in terms of sales growth, but in every case, the wisdom isn't necessarily having the answer when you start. It's the wisdom to hear and adapt, it may be hearing from individuals, it may be hearing from the market, but
Hmm.
whatever the case is, it's that adaptability, that agility to evolve that I think is a much more important asset than
Yeah.
actually having the right answer when you begin. Sure, have the best hypotheses you can, for sure. Spend some time at that. But I've
Yeah.
never seen anybody that gets it right to start. It's
Yeah.
the evolution and
Well,
that
that's life,
understanding.
isn't it? That's
Yeah.
life, isn't it? We all learn as we go along. But if we're thinking about sort of measures of success, because if we don't see it, and my maritime examples will not be as good as yours, but I'll try to keep them more loosely sort of travel related. But if we don't define where we're sort of going, it's hard to know which direction we're setting off into. So how do we sort of how should we think about ROI when entering new markets? Is there a sort of a high level guardrail or a piece of advice or some experience you've got to help us think about that, Bill?
Well, I mean, everything we do should be sort of outcome centered. So what are the goals? Why are we expanding? We should answer that question to start with. And then, within that, what outcomes do we need or want in the first 12, 24, 36 months that will generate the sort of that outcome that we're looking for. And so that, then I think it's I think where we tend to see companies get challenged is when they from there begin to define sort of indicators, and more often than not, companies define trailing what we would think of as trailing indicators. In other words,
Hmm.
sort of you know what was our sales in the last month or last quarter, um, and we tend to look at leading indicators. What tell us that those results are coming. So it could be from a sales standpoint, it could be number of appointments, number of appointments with high quality prospects. It could be, number of proposals presented. I mean, again, there's a variety of sort of leading indicators, and they're going to vary a bit by sort of customer type. But I think you want to have as many leading indicators or the best leading indicators that you can that show, I mean, the hardest profession, and there are lots. I'm not saying that any profession isn't hard, but is sales. It's almost like being a comedian, right? You're so vulnerable, and you can get, you have to be, thick skinned, and you have to be used to taking no's and all of that. You don't like no's, but it's much better than a maybe for sure. So getting that every no. I mean, there's kind of an old adage: every no gets you closer to a yes,
Hmm.
and you know, if you don't understand that, then your sales isn't probably for you.
Yeah.
But I think tracking those no's and tracking the yeses is great, and there are smaller no's and smaller yeses that happen in every relationship as you go. So kind of getting
Hmm.
those and finding those that are really good indications of eventual closed sales. And that's
Yeah.
really kind of the key.
And I guess that's, if we're sat here now running Andrew and Bill Enterprises and we've been really successful in the US and we're now saying, let's pick our next country to go and dominate with our product or service, that's a way of us early testing appetite, I suppose, isn't it? The early leading indicators of potential interest, signing up to discussions. They're not purchases. We don't know how we're going to sell it in that region yet, but there's little bites that suggest that's an early indicator, and that makes perfect sense. And I guess what about the flip side of this? When people come to you and say, "Hey, can you help with this?" Do you see them make common mistakes where they're just completely ignoring something, or is that the converse where they want the sales too early and they're not putting in the groundwork? Is there anything that you see people do wrong consistently?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So most of our clients come to us after they fail at U.S. expansion. So it's an awful place to be because it kind of sounds like a really bad country music song. Um, I lost my pickup, I lost my marriage. All those things have happened. And I say it lightly, but it's tragic,
Yeah.
and it really affects us when we hear these stories. So yeah, I would say in our 14 years, we've kind of distilled it down to three core problems that companies or challenges that companies face as they expand, and one is not focusing on customer density. And so, what I mean by that is uh, geographic density and also industry density.
Mhm.
And there are a variety of reasons. Obviously, some are logistical. But let's just talk about that from a sales efficiency standpoint, because it at some point, and it may be in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, you're going to want to hire your first American salesperson. And the only way that they're going to be successful is if, and sales are never easy, but if sales are at least a system, that there is there's a kind of a proven path. And we all know this, that in any new market, the first sale, or with a new product, the first sale is hard. It's arduous. You're learning a language. Evolving the product or
Yeah.
service to fit what you're hearing. You're evolving the marketing to fit what you're hearing. And so, every industry and every geography you go in the US, like most places, is a different language. And so, not only do you have to perfect that language to make sales a routine, when you bring somebody on board, they have to learn that language, because specific to your company. And realistically, how many languages do you expect them to learn, right?
Yeah.
So get them right, get them good in one language, and then expand from there.
Mhm.
And it's we kind of see three steps in the evolution of at least getting scale, or beginning to scale in the US. Is sort of going from that founder-led sales, which is the second fail point, where companies come in and don't have a founder driving sales in the US. And there may be other people associated and supporting, but that they have to hear the feedback from the customers. They have to be able to translate that to the home office to be able to make change,
Yeah.
whether that's product or communication. And it just doesn't work without active founder involvement. But when they're doing that, then kind of the second stage is when somebody can be hired, that individual being successful. That's sort of stage two. And then stage three, once that one person is successful without support, then you can scale the sales team. And it's sort of like going from a dirt road to a paved road to the Autobahn, right? It's kind of what you're hoping to do.
Yeah.
And then the kind of the third area where we see companies fail, and it's kind of where we started, which was not having agility in terms of their ability to both offer the product that fits the market, but also the ability to communicate about it. And it, when you've got a sort of a second market, it's it's really hard. And again, without that founder translator, it's really hard for the second market to influence the home office to make
Yeah.
change. It's almost, we've been in that position where it take months, and the U.S. moves really quick. So
Mhm.
that agility and that founder involvement, where you know if you're a few thousand miles away, you have zero influence and no
Yeah.
relationship. Where the founder periodically be and sitting at people's desks, and there's accountability, there's trust, there's all that a new person or a new entity won't have that. So
And
that kind of those three are really where we see companies get challenged and fail.
and I think there's and you touched on it a little bit there, but a real added complexity when that sort of founder mentality dynamics in one country and then the new salesperson's in another country, and that ability to distill what's what translates into this new region and what clearly doesn't translate into that region. And it's not because we're being disrespectful to the original founder's message. It just doesn't, it's not called that over here. And if you call
Yeah,
it that, it's just not going to work. And
yeah.
I assume there's all that sort of, well, we're saying the same word, but very, very differently as well that's happening.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think it's really easy to discount how a company starts, and the process it goes through to evolve to where it is before it expands across a border. And there's so much organic about that. There's so much learning that is just it's sort of baked in that we forget about because now
Mhm.
we're on to these other big ambitions. And it's there's a lot of hard fought lessons that we learn in the early days that one of the things we do, and you're very familiar with the business model canvas tool. One of the things we do with companies, and there are I think it's 9 rectangles or 8 rectangles on that tool, and they're all about sort of it's kind of a business plan on one page. And one of the two most important squares or rectangles on that in and where we kind of blank out the rest of the rectangles for our clients and say, okay, you're coming into the US. There are only two of these we need to be concerned about in the first 6 months, and that's customer segment, who are we aiming at, and value proposition. That's all we should be concerned about. We don't really need to worry about anything else until we validate that there are
Yeah.
customers and what language they're speaking, so that we can make sure that when as we kind of scale our outreach, that we're being effective and efficient. But yeah, no,
Uh,
this until you get sales right, not a lot else really matters.
yeah, and we've had a lot of guests on here talking about cultural nuances and language
Mm,
differences as well, and I think that it all flows directly through sales. I'm sure you've got lots of examples. I've got a great example of a business I work for, and it had a really strict mantra, which was the right one, that we should have one operating model and one language and one way of doing things. And I think that's really sensible, especially in a business that's acquisitive, because if the flip side of that is you end up with microcosms everywhere and mini cultures and languages. So I sort of get it. But at the same time, that especially in the one language and the one vocabulary, and within sales, you have to be really careful as well. We had an actual example where we had a team over in APAC who was sort of saying that is not what the service is called over here. And it's like, yes, but we have one way of doing it, but you will waste millions of dollars on SEO and pay per click because that's just not what it's. And it was almost like that realization of it's not that you're breaking your mantra, and I understand why everybody's trying to hold on to that, but it just is what it is. It's not called that. You can't change that, and that understanding that and being such a passionate founder, that's got to be a really difficult job for you to do, Bill. In terms of, yeah, I get what you're trying to do, but you've just got to let go of that and trust a little bit in this strategy.
Yeah, I think I often think about ego. It's not it's we don't talk about it a lot as a tool or hindrance in expansion, but I think it's a really important thing, right? You wouldn't cross an ocean, you wouldn't start a business unless you had some ego. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really important.
Yeah.
But I but
People
I
on the
think
other side of the ocean do want to hear what I have to say. It's a little bit.
exactly. They need me clearly. But on the other hand, if I think empathy is such a critical tool, and certainly it empathy certainly um, makes us think about how do we listen better, and more than that, how do we ingest, how do we hear better, right? How do we take what we've heard and put it to action in terms of
Yeah.
supporting the person across from us. And I think that I think the ego has a balance, and I think it's just about how do we balance. And the best founders I've seen are incredible listeners.
Mhm.
They're keenly interested in hearing opinions, and particularly opinions of people who are new to seeing a product or service, and really, and not just at a surface level, not just asking, what do you think about this, but you know why, what happens in your day that you feel this would be useful, or that it
Yeah.
or what do you find would be more useful, where are your tensions during the day, where do you have roadblocks, and those types of things, but where they really don't stop at the surface. They dig in and really try to understand from the other person's perspective exactly what's going on. And that,
Yeah.
I think that rings true both internally and externally, right? With customers, but also with the internal team. So
Hmm.
um, I think that's
And so
key.
you mentioned before about we're sort of now getting access to all this great data and all these learning indicators and you know and using specific examples of sort of how you help businesses come into the US. How do you help people use that data to make better decisions?
Yeah. So give me an example. So we've now kind of come out with a kind of a suite of tools, and one of the tools is called the event cookbook. So when once we've kind of gleaned enough data from a company, we can actually, I think one of the things we found at going to trade shows is that people just sort of go. It's funny. I had a meeting recently with a very large, globally known accounting firm. You know their name. I won't say who they are. But I went in and it was, they had called us in. They had said, we want some help. We're not getting enough out of our events. And so of course, the first question is, you know, what's your goal in going to these events? Or, how do you measure kind of outcomes? And the serious response was, we measure success when we arrive and all of our team arrives and all of our stuff gets there. Has nothing to do with you know preset meetings. Has
Yeah.
nothing to do with
Did
like
I
driving sales
physically arrive at the destination? Yeah.
and all the stuff
Yeah.
arrives. So yeah, I mean, and they take 30 billable people to an event. I mean, this
Yeah.
isn't a small investment, right? So anyway, that was a fun conversation. But I think the point really here is that this tool we've developed helps companies literally be able to know by day, by individual, what outcomes should be. So in other words, if
Right.
somebody's in a booth, how many how many quality contacts they should make in the booth that day for it to be successful. And this is all driven by what financial outcome do we want from this event. So that's kind of where we start. And then, kind of again, from developing a good data model, we're able to output then, okay, so what if we're going to have three people in the booth at all times? What's the production per person need to be for us to do that? How many one-on-one meetings do we need to have preset going in so we can actually, the people who are going know that they need to set for each day three or four, you know, uh, meetings during the
Hmm.
event. But there are all sorts of, again, I think that, I think the thing that we've had a challenge with as we go to a service economy is, it was so easy when we were producing things, right? At the end of the day, we could feel really successful because we made four things or 10 things, right? And yesterday we only made nine things. So I feel much better today, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we get some sense of accomplishment. And I think, people shy away from, and we see this with our clients, shy away from that kind of accountability. But what we found as we implement it is actually the team gets much more excited and
Hmm.
satisfied because they go, I know what I did today.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I can validate my value here. And I'm getting better at what I'm doing because here's the evidence. Then I went to last month, I did X or Y, and this is X or Y plus 10 at the event this week. So, we can, in using that, again, being outcome based and everybody keeps score when they play sports. Score is really important in
Yeah.
sales,
Yeah.
and quite frankly, I think the hard thing, and maybe the other kind of thing that doesn't get talked about very much with expansion is time. And talked about ego, but time is so critical. So let's just say, we're at day one of our expansion, and you and I are expanding our widget company, and all of our stakeholders are so excited, right? We have the ribbon cutting, our spouses are into it, our investors are into it. Our team, our leadership team, and the initial team really into it. Well, what we don't realize is every single person somewhere, probably on their forehead, has a clock, and
Yeah.
this is how long they're going to be committed,
Yeah.
without some level of reinforcement of why it was a good decision. Right? The
Hmm.
investors have a certain amount of time. Our spouse has a certain amount of time. The leadership team has a certain amount of time, and they will all expire. Um, and so, I think part of what you need to do is develop a system of incremental wins, small wins. In the U.S., we would, because we are a baseball, not cricket, uh, community, we would say base hits. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the equivalent in cricket is, but
Hmm.
we
Yeah.
need to, the smallest sign of progress. We need to have
Mhm.
those, and anything we can do to sort of reinforce why we're here, and why it's important is enormously valuable. Not only to actually move the ball forward, but in terms of being able to celebrate wins. I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
just hugely important.
And I think most people recognize that methodology of sales and marketing within their own region. And I think what's really interesting is actually that you're sort of lifting up and professionalizing that, looking at sort of supporting businesses enter the US. And I think one of the conversations and potential pitfalls that we see a lot that you may be able to comment on is it can be expensive, sales and marketing in the US. They're very expensive from a personnel perspective, for people not understanding the difference between sort of at will employment and the whole host of that as well. And sort of that sort of ROI and the need to measure, this can burn through cash pretty quickly as well. Do you see that sort of two-part question? Do you see businesses make that mistake a lot, and do you see people burn through the cash and then go, "Oh, not for me," and walk away?
Yeah, I mean, 70% of companies expanding to the U.S. fail. So, yeah, it's so. But I kind of feel like this is the discussion around, healthy food can't be cheap, and then I go out to the store and I buy a bag of black beans for like $1. Um, uh, and that's one of the most healthy foods
Yeah,
in the world. So I would say, sure, if you go, if again, kind of taking our world as an example, they kind of going to events, as a means of growth, and which for B2B and B2G companies, that generally makes a lot of sense in the US. I would say no. I would say certainly if you go to national events, you should have, you know, tens and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in your annual budget, to do. And we actually just did a study on this just a couple of weeks ago, and we found that the average budget for a company coming in and just doing 4 national events a year. So pick your in whatever industry vertical, whoever your
uh-huh,
target is, pick the 4 national events. Your budget should, as a minimum, be 250,000 a year, and maybe 400 is probably
yeah,
more likely, and could, if you're a real, go-getter, it might be 600.
yeah,
We would not advocate that. Even before doing this study, it makes no sense from our standpoint. But just think of it from the lead flow, standpoint. So you're getting leads once a quarter.
mhm.
You're getting an overwhelming amount at one moment with a very small team. You got the founder right there. So
That
why
that
you
all
go?
your competitors are also speaking to at the same exactly the same time as well.
I mean, I think to a lesser, you're a small fish in a big pond. I mean, and I'm not saying you shouldn't go to those events, or one or two of them, and walk through, get
Mhm,
used to it, get industry familiarity, all that, maybe speak and so on. But in terms of the marketing investment, in both in time and resource, I would say, that's a challenge, and a much different way to go at it, um, would be, and this is what we've advocated for years, is having a local and regional strategy to start. And again, that it goes right back to customer density. We want customers, again, let's just pick New York because it's easy. Let's just say we start in New York, and it's so much easier to train somebody in one metro area, right? We bring that first salesperson on board. We say, okay, come in. We're selling to banks in New York. And so, you're responsible for, we have 20 banks on board now. I got us here. You need to get us, up to 50, or whatever. Or you go to Boston and sell banks. But this is the working model. Copy it, go there, right? We train you for a couple of weeks. You can come back by train, 4-hour ride anytime you want. And you have reference customers that are very, appropriate. And so, from an event strategy, we would just do local and regional events to banks that have that buyer persona we want from banks in New York. And as opposed to being once a quarter, those happen every week. And they're small. If they're exhibits, they're tabletop. They're a
Yeah.
half a day, much lower cost. And you're talking about a budget between like 25,000 for 25 events,
Hmm. Yeah.
and maybe you might go up to like 150 if you really kind of went nuts.
Yeah.
And so you can have a much higher. So think about that. It's 2 events a month, one every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You have a much more steady flow of leads. Plus, in a small area, you begin getting a network effect, right? We begin to meet partners who are interesting. We get to sleep in our own bed at night, creates a lot of efficiency. You're already, 5 hours different than your home office if you're in the
Hmm.
UK, or 6 hours than Europe. So that the less abuse you take on your body,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
better, because you're going to be working two work days, or at least a day and a half anyway. The founders we know are 7 days a week
Hmm.
generally.
Yeah.
Um, and and so, yeah, I think you can be so much more efficient, and both in a cost and growth. You'll grow quicker. You'll have a model that's replicable, where it's really hard when you look, try to bite the elephant or eat the elephant as one. We want to eat that
Yeah.
elephant in small bites.
Yeah. No, I think that makes perfect sense. And it sort of takes me on to sort of a next thought, which is, most businesses who are expanding internationally are coming into the US, even though the founders still involved, are highly likely to have brought on some form of professional investment. And because usually that's what's spearheading the growth, which is, hey, you've done a great job in your domestic region, go and do this in other regions as well. So is there any um is there any takeaway advice you can give those founders who now have to sort of convince that board that this is a sensible investment now? Is there any sort of takeaway little bits you can give? Because that's a new skill that they're having to deal with as well, dealing with a new board, new investors, as well as sort of trying to take their business internationally.
Yeah, I think, we've kind of, the context of this has been a lot around sort of the analytics or measurement. And I think being really sound in terms of, in your home market, knowing what it takes to create a sale. So what are the activities and actions and investment that you kind of, your cost per per close or per new customer, and the activities around it. But then also, to the extent you can, architecting what you think it's going to take in the new country, and even validate that. Let's do some pre-testing so that we can, begin. I mean, I think there are stages, right? Is there interest, right? Or do we, we have this sort of list of suspects, but how many become prospects? And a prospect in our world is very tightly defined. It's somebody who has a need, they have money or budget, and then they're urgent. They have to
Hmm.
have all three of those, or they're not a prospect. So, are we able, in that new market, have we done some testing to find prospects? And in how many suspects create a prospect? And then, and are any do any agree to a meeting? And from there, do any make sense to propose, or to do a demo, or whatever kind of our stages of sales might be? But I think the more you can be clear of what it takes in that new country, both having your current system and the analytics of it, but then the better you can understand the analytics of sales in the new country. Because how, I mean, in the end, how big is the market opportunity and how interested are they in the solution? I think are two, they're very different. It's great to have a big market, but if the problem's already solved there, or there are other problems they're trying to solve that are higher priority, I think
Yeah.
you want to in the end, I think with, to directly answer your question about investment, they're concerned about, investors are simple. They're concerned about only two things, right? What's the opportunity, and what's the risk
Yeah.
associated with that?
Hmm.
How much can I make, and what's the relative risk of of you know of not making that?
And I think, as you said, lots of useful conversations there, all looking around data and methodology and and being steady and sensible with your growth plans. If anybody's sat here listening to this now to say, yeah, you've made that sound really easy, Bill, but it's just not. Where can they find more about Meet services and you, and understand how you might be able to help their business?
Yeah, certainly. Our website is meetroi.com. Certainly on there, you can directly reach out to me. My email's on there, so please don't hesitate. And I would just say that, we, our biggest drive is to help companies avoid the challenges of expansion into the U.S., and whether we can help directly, or we connect you to a great resource, we're very happy. And so, have we have great partners like Briar's Group, and many others who have a variety of skills that can help. So happy to have a conversation again. Wherever it leads, it leads. But our only goal is to improve the success rate of businesses coming into the U.S.
Bill, thank you so much. That has been hugely interesting. If anybody gets an opportunity to hear Bill talk, I would very much advocate doing that. I got the pleasure of seeing him at Going Global Live in London last year as well. So, Bill, thank you so much. Please do reach out, and if you are thinking about expanding into the US and how Bill and Meet ROI, the website might be able to help. Bill, thank you so much. And for everybody else, keep pushing those businesses beyond borders, and we will see you next time.